love a good debut novel. I love finding the new and shiny. Who doesn't? A debut novel is an author's first entry into the world of publishing. Usually, the debut novel is the first novel that an author publishes. It's usually not the first one they write, but it is the first one that has sold to a publisher. Yes, I have my favorite authors who have been publishing a long time, and I enjoy going through their backlist, but there is something exciting about a new author who is exploring the art of fiction. So I guess I saved the best Edgar Award category for last. In this video, I am going to be reading through all the nominees for the best debut novel of 2022. The Edgar Awards are awards put out by the Mystery Writers of America. And no, they're not sponsoring this video or anything. I'm just a mystery reader, a mystery thriller lover, and every year I get excited about the Edgar Awards. And so this year I decided to read through a couple of the categories. So the Edgar Awards highlight the best in mystery, thriller, and suspense. And there are a lot of categories, and I definitely did not read through them all, but I have thoroughly enjoyed the categories that I have read through. I read through the nominees for Best Paperback Original, and I read through the nominees of Best Novel. Today you're getting Best Debut. The final results for the Edgar Awards will be announced on April 28th, which is just a few days away, I think, unless you're watching this after April 28th, in which case it already happened, and you can go to the video where I talk about the results and whether or not I'm any good at guessing losers and winners. But for those of you who are watching this before April 28th, that is when the winners of these categories will be announced, and I will be returning with another video to talk about the results and whether or not I agree with them. Without further ado, let's get to the reading portion of this video. This book is giving off some very high domestic suspense vibes with the leaves and the woman, shadowy woman figure in the background. I actually really like this cover. I really think it gives off a good thriller vibe. This book has been on my Goodreads TBR for a while, and so obviously at some point I read about what the book was about and wanted to read it. But it's not coming to me right now what the premise is. So I'm thinking definitely like a domestic suspense, something happens with a family in the fall. This cover definitely seems like a book that I'm going to love. It just is giving off Valerie Geary is going to love this book vibes. I am really impressed by this debut. So this book was complicated and wow. So the book opens with a woman, Julia Hall, arriving at this detective's house. He's a retired detective. His name is John Rice, and he is sick. He is battling cancer. I think he has terminal cancer. He hasn't been given very much longer to live. He has called this woman, Julia Hall, to his house. He says, "We need to talk." She shows up and she's nervous and she's like, "What does this guy want to talk to me about?" It becomes clear to her very quickly that he wants to talk about a case involving her brother-in-law, Nick. Julia is married to Tony, who is Nick's older brother, kind of like a father figure to Nick. Nick was involved in a sexual assault in college about 3 years prior to this book opening. And that is what this story revolves around. It revolves around this family that was affected by this assault and the case that proceeded from there. You get several narrators in this book. You get several timelines. It's got a little bit police procedural vibes, a little bit legal thriller vibes, and a whole lot of domestic suspense vibes. And what I really enjoyed about this one was the family dynamics, the way that the threads between the characters wove in and out, and also the complicated nature of justice that was discussed in this book. There weren't a lot of easy answers here. There were a lot of questions that were raised and not a lot of solutions. It was, if you go this direction, it's not going to be great. If you go this direction, it's also not going to be great. And just kind of trying to find a way to behave and to make a choice that you can live with. And so that kind of exploration of psychology after a crime was really interesting to me. The other thing I really liked was the exploration of toxic masculinity and how we think about men who are attacked and assaulted, and also how we think about father figures and the role that abuse plays through generations. This book went a lot of places that I wasn't expecting. It surprised me, it kept me on the edge of my seat, and I really enjoyed the depth and exploration of the characters' emotions and psychological traumas throughout this book. A very impressive debut, a very good start to this category. Classic shadowy faced woman on the cover. I'm going to go ahead and say this is going to be a psychological thriller. I actually have this on my virtual TBR. I heard about this one last year, and I have a vague recollection that it's some kind of campus book, some kind of story involving a student on a campus, something dark and twisted. While I think the faces on covers can be kind of overdone, I do love the way they did this title with the colors, and I'm really looking forward to finding out what this one is all about. I definitely didn't see this book coming. I loved the premise of this book. We have a young woman who is starting college and she is part of this psychopath program. So basically the psychology department at this school has signed up a bunch of students. They've given them scholarships to come to this school and participate in this psychopathy program. And there is a therapist who is studying them. They're partaking in experiments and surveys. Basically, the program is just studying psychopaths and whether or not they can integrate into society. So the main character, Chloe, right from the start, we find out she is part of this psychopath program. She has been diagnosed as a psychopath, as an antisocial personality disorder, and we are following her for a lot of the book as she goes about her day as a typical college student. Except for one thing with Chloe is that she is also here to kill a boy who hurt her a long time ago. This is a psychological thriller with a lot of twisted, wicked mind games happening as you have psychopath pitted against psychopath. Oh, right. The other part of this book, in addition to Chloe being part of this psychopath program and tracking down this boy and planning to kill him, is that there is a killer out there, a killer on the loose on campus who is hunting the psychopaths who are part of this program. So we have a psychopath hunting psychopaths, hunting psychopaths. It's just, you know, the snake that ate its tail. This psychological thriller kept me riveted from page 1 to the very end. Chloe was a very intriguing character, but we also got to see the narrative storylines of some of the other characters, some of the other students, and even the professor who was involved in the psychopath study. It was interesting to watch them all kind of intertwine and all their storylines come together and to try and decipher who was the bad guy, who was the good guy, who was lying, who was telling the truth, who do we root for. This is a stellar debut. I was super impressed with this book, with the writing style, with the narrative structure, with the characters, with the premise. I just really enjoyed this one. It was dark and twisty in all the right ways, and a rather interesting look into human psychosis and human behavior and nature versus nurture. I also really enjoyed watching these characters try and fit in with their normal college life. I found the characters to be just very devious in the things they were doing. There was an irresistibleness to this book, to these characters, because we are reading about people who don't always make the best decisions and don't always have the best intentions in mind and aren't, you know, nice people. But I found myself compelled to keep reading about them, very drawn to their story and to their personalities. Yes, I was drawn to a psychopath's personality. These characters were just very well drawn on the page, and I had a lot of fun reading about all their wicked games that they played. And I think the debut category for the Edgar Awards is coming out with the strongest contenders, the strongest books. This is neck and neck right now as a contender for my pick for the winner. Suburban Dicks. That's a title if I've ever heard one. I have never heard of this book. I don't know what it's about. So I'm thinking there might be some comic book vibes. There's definitely like a comic book feel. I'm assuming this is gonna be about detectives in suburbia. I'm hoping that it'll be kind of funny, lighthearted, not like feel good, but just kind of that like dark comedy, like a buddy comedy, but we solve murders. This book was way funnier than I expected it to be. A very pregnant, disgruntled suburban housewife teams up with a disgraced, bitter reporter who is at the very bottom of his game. He was a reporter that shot out of the gate in his early teens, 20s. As a college reporter, he reported on some political mayhem that happened in his town. He became a superstar. People adored him. He was their favorite reporter, and then he had a slide, a downfall. This book opens on a gas station, a suburban gas station in New Jersey. The man working there is just minding his own business when he is gunned down. And then what happens after in that very first scene is just, I want you to see it for yourself. I don't really want to sit here and tell you what happens, all the ins and outs of this book. It was biting and sarcastic, just cutting commentary about the state of things, about the state of suburbia and police in suburbia. I really enjoyed the characters, the back and forth between this pregnant suburban housewife who had bigger dreams for herself. She wanted to be someone else, but she got pregnant young, settled down. She's not super happy with her husband. She's not super happy with her kids or her life. She's just very discontent and wants more, and she finds more as she's investigating this murder of a neighbor, of this man who works at the gas station. He comes from a generation of Indian immigrants, and the police kind of aren't really taking the case seriously. So our suburban housewife and this reporter team up and try to solve the case, and what they find is that the police have not been paying attention to the communities of color in New Jersey for a really long time. There is a deep conspiracy that is uncovered. And as the book unfolds, you're just pulled deeper and deeper into the lives of these suburbanites, into the lives of these two main characters, and into the crime itself. I didn't love everything about this book. There were times when the author, I guess, made fun of people too far, pushed the line a little bit. To be fair, he did push the line with everybody. Nobody was safe from his commentary. Nobody was safe from getting picked on or being made fun of, but sometimes it just was a little too much for me. I believe that this author is also a screenplay writer, and it definitely comes across in this book. This is a very readable, very digestible mystery. I was quickly turning the pages, eager to find out what was going to happen next. It did read like a movie. I could see it all playing out in front of me. I normally like more lush writing and atmospheric tone and the moody, broody settings, but this one worked for me. I had a good time reading it. I think this is going to be the start of a series, and I think that I would definitely check out book 2 just to revisit these characters who I had a great time getting to know. This is, I think, book 3 out of 5 of the debut nominees for this year's Edgar Awards, and wow, I am impressed with all of them. I thought the last 2 categories were hard picks, but I don't know. I mean, I still have 2 more books to read. There are no front runners right now for me. All 3 that I have read so far have been excellent books and would make excellent winners. This debut has been on my radar. The only thing I really remember hearing about this book was that it was set somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, Washington, I think, some kind of tiny coastal town. I live in the Pacific Northwest. I love books set in the Pacific Northwest. When I saw that it was a nominee on the Edgar Best Debut list, I was excited to finally get around to reading it. I have a feeling this is going to be some kind of psychological suspense, some kind of domestic thriller. There is a house hidden in the woods here. I think it's probably going to be a more character-driven novel, and I'm looking forward to finding out what this book is all about. I loved this book so much that I broke it. I am not this rough with my books. Yeah, I might dog-ear pages and I might underline and I definitely break the spines, but I would never. Here's what happened. I bought this book used, and I think whoever had it before me loved it very generously, and then by the time I got it, it was falling apart even further. And then, okay, confession, I accidentally dropped it, and that's when it just completely came apart. Maybe I'll do a YouTube video about how to glue your books back together at some point. Besides the fact that I read this book so hard it broke, I loved this book. What comes after was a very character-driven psychological mystery. This is set in a small coastal town in Washington. A small community is shaken by tragedy after one of their young sons, a high schooler, is killed. His body is found in the woods. A few days later, his best friend admits to murdering him and commits suicide. So this book is about the crime, but it is not necessarily about solving the crime, about who did it. It is really what comes after. It examines the community after such tragic events have taken place and the families that were involved and kind of the aftershocks of grief and the aftershocks of this horrible, tragic situation that happened. It is definitely a quieter book when it comes to mysteries and suspense, but it was still very engaging, and I was really drawn to the character study and to watching how these people who are all connected by this death, how they come to terms with the death. There are a couple of different narrators in this book. You have a young woman, a young teenage girl who is on her own, and you kind of learn about her history a little bit. In addition, we are getting the perspective of the murdered boy's father and his utter just grief, the loss that he is feeling. He is a deeply faithful man. He's a Quaker. He is religious, but after his son is murdered, he begins to question everything he thought he knew about God and about his faith. You also get a few chapters in the perspective of the murderer, the boy who murdered his friend. And those chapters went a long way to understanding the reason why, to understanding the how, to understanding what the father and the other people in this community may never understand. There was a lot of discussion in here about good and evil and how we define that. There was also a lot of discussion in here about faith and how that shapes us and our decision making and the way we treat people. This was a heartbreaking book. I found myself deeply moved by it, by the way the characters interacted and the way they broke, the way they hurt. There was a lot of emotion on every page, and I was rooting for this community to heal. I really wanted them to come together and find beauty out of all of this darkness and all of this tragedy. Another element that I really liked about this book was the idea of found family, of this father who has lost his only son. His wife has left him. He takes in this young stray, this young girl who needs his help. And there's tension between them, this kind of crackling back and forth, because should he be taking care of her? And when they begin to care about each other, there are these outside forces that threaten to disrupt the relationship that they've built. And I really enjoyed watching them struggle together, to struggle to figure out what they were to each other and whether or not they could protect that. My heart was in my throat for a lot of this book, not because it was, like an edge of your seat thriller, but just because of the emotional stakes that were at play. I love this book so hard. It tore me apart, so I tore it apart. This cover isn't giving me a whole lot to go off of in terms of plot or what this might be about. Deer season, I don't know, maybe a hunting accident, something happens when people are out in the woods. This cover is just kind of boring to me. It's not giving me a lot of emotions, it's not giving me a lot of feelings, it's not giving me a lot about what this book might be. Like I've said in previous videos, I'm not really reading the backs of these books before I dive into them. I'm just kind of cracking them open. I'm just diving in headfirst without any real foreknowledge of what the plot might actually be about. The covers are kind of helping me guess a little bit here and there. Some of the books I have already heard of. This is not one that I have heard of. This is not one that I know anything about. So I'm going in. Wish me luck. This book was a little unexpected, honestly. Wow, I read this very quickly. I read it over the course of 2.5 days, and it impressed me. This is definitely one of those books that is flying under the radar and needs a lot more love. This story takes place in a small farm country town in Nebraska. When the book first opens, we are introduced to a couple, to Alma and Clyle. Clyle? It was kind of a strange name, C-L-Y-L-E. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Like Clyde, but Clyle? So we are introduced to this couple. They are a middle-aged couple. They don't have any children. They are running this pig farm. They have taken in a young man whose name is Hal. And Hal has lived in this community for a while, and he is in his early 20s. He helps out at the farm. When Hal was a boy, he almost drowned in a lake. His mother wasn't watching him, and he suffered brain trauma, brain injury. Because of this incident, Hal has a developmental disability. He has the mental capacity of someone much younger than himself. But Alma and Clyle have taken him in, and they really believe in him as like an independent entity, as an adult, as a person who can look after himself. And so they've given him a lot of tools to do that. Now, when this book first opens, Hal comes back from a hunting trip with some friends that may or may not be his friends, and Alma is very suspicious of them. Hal claims that he has shot a deer. There's blood in his truck. cut to a young woman in this community is missing and Hal is the main suspect. And like several of the books in this debut category, Deer Season was a very emotionally interior, a very psychologically driven, character-driven kind of book, where we see the layers and the nuances and the intricacies of especially like a small town community turning against itself, turning against the people who live there. Alma is from outside this community. She did not grow up in this farm town. She married into it when she married Clio. She's like a big city woman. She has her own history of like grief and losses. She's kind of cantankerous. Nobody really likes her. She doesn't get along with people, but she also has this like very warm part of herself, this very warm, soft center that comes out every once in a while. And I just really connected with her as a character. I found her to be incredibly strong and interesting, and I was just really invested in her story and the fierce way that she protects her family, the fierce way that she protected Hal. But also what I really enjoyed about her were her imperfections, was the fact that she didn't always make the best choices. She made the choices that felt right to her, the ones that made sense in terms of protecting what was hers. So Alma is a narrator in this book, but there is also another narrator, Milo, who is the missing girl's brother. And I found that added layer to be really moving because we weren't just watching, this town search for this young woman, and we weren't just watching this town attack this man who may or may not be innocent. We also got to see the grieving process of the family through Milo's eyes. There was a lot of emotional depth to this book. And I think it's one that a lot of people would really enjoy, especially if you really like psychological mysteries, small town mysteries, character-driven books with emotional depth and layers and broken people. So good job, Erin Flanagan, on a stellar debut. When it came to the debut novel category, all of these books were winners. There was not a bad one in the bunch. There was a depth of emotion, heartbreaking stories, twists and turns that blew my mind, wicked psychopathic fun, laugh out loud mysteries. I had a feeling when I was going into the debut novel category that I was going to be reading through a lot of really great books, but I wasn't expecting to love all 5 of them. In the previous categories that I read through, there were definitely some misses for me, but in this debut category, every single one of them could win, and I would be completely thrilled about it. They all deserve this nomination. And honestly, they all deserve a medal. Let's just give them all a medal. Give them all the prize. Every one of them is a winner. You could pick up any single one of these books if you're a mystery thriller reader and just enjoy each and every single one of them. But that's not the game here, is it? No. The game, the thing that I set myself up to do, is to try and guess the winner. The winner's gonna be announced April 28th. That's next week. We're gonna find out who won in these categories. And we're gonna see whether I'm good at guessing whether or not books are winners or losers. Ooh. I mean, I read it in 3 days. All right, I'm picking The Damage. I think The Damage by Caitlin Warrer is the winner of the debut novel category. I think there were a lot of interesting elements in here, including the idea of victimhood and who can be victims. I enjoyed the interplay between the characters. I enjoyed the exploration of toxic masculinity and also the exploration of family and what that means and how we kind of close in and protect ourselves. I also thought there were a lot of good twists in this one, a lot of things I wasn't expecting, and it was really well paced with a nice balance of good writing, interesting emotional layers, and page-turning plot. So yeah, this is my pick for the debut novel winner. I hope you'll join me on this channel next week as I break down the results and let you know my thoughts and feelings about the real winners of the Edgar Awards. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.